Hello, welcome to lesson 35. We are going to add in the subjunctive mood in the present and aorist, active, middle, and passive. And we're going to learn three uses of the subjunctive: the hortatory, deliberative, and prohibitive subjunctives. So think about the present indicative active. We know it's formed from the first principal part, and it consists of personal endings. And before each personal ending, there is, sometimes fairly well hidden, an epsilon or omicron theme vowel. And so for the present indicative active, the personal endings that we attached to that stem from the first principal part are o, ace, a, amen, ete, usen. Well, to form the present subjunctive active, we are going to be lengthening that theme vowel. So here's the present subjunctive active. Okay, so o, ace, a, omen, ate, osen. Something you'll probably notice right away is that the first person singular looks exactly like the first person singular of the present indicative active. Also, the third person singular looks exactly like the second person singular present indicative middle passive. So here is the present indicative middle passive, right? And if you think about the present indicative middle passive, its endings, it's still built on that stem from the first principal part, but now we have the theme vowel, epsilon or omicron, plus the primary middle passive personal endings, right? My, psi, tie, metha, sphe, and entai, right? And in the second person singular, we have the contraction, right? We have si, intervoxalic sigma drops out, and we have these alternative forms, a or a. Well, what we have for the present subjunctive middle passive is going to be these same primary middle passive endings, but with a lengthened theme vowel. So now we have padeomai, padeoe, padeoetai, padeometha, padeoestha, padeowontai. Okay, so this looks just like one of the alternative forms for the second person singular indicative middle passive, and just like the third person singular of the present subjunctive active. So we're building up a lot of ambiguous forms now. All right, let's talk about second aorists. So we know that the second aorist indicative, active and middle, is formed from this stem from the third principal part. And we're going to use that same stem from the third principal part to form the aorist subjunctive active and middle. We're going to leave off the augment though, because subjunctives like infinitives and imperatives and participles don't have time. They just have aspect. So present subjunctives are going to have imperfective aspect. Aorist subjunctives are going to have aoristic aspect. The second aorist subjunctive active is again from that same stem with the exact same endings we just used for the present subjunctive active. So o, ace, a, omen, a to osen. And the second aorist middle uses the exact same endings that we just used for the present subjunctive middle. Omai, a, atai, ometha, aestha, ontai. Now, here's a first aorist. Remember, for the first aorist indicative, again, we use this stem for the present and the middle, this stem from the third principal part. To form the aorist subjunctive active, again, we use that stem from the third principal part and the exact same endings we used for the present subjunctive active. For the aorist subjunctive middle, we use that stem from the third principal part and the exact same endings we used for the present subjunctive middle. Okay, so in every case, we use the same principal part that we would use for the indicative, and we're using the same exact endings. One set for the active, one set for the middle. Finally, sixth principal part for the aorist indicative, also sixth principal part for the aorist passive subjunctive. And the exact same endings, except differently accented. So the aorist subjunctive passive, same exact endings we saw in the present subjunctive active, because remember, in the aorist indicative passive, we're also using active looking endings. In the aorist participles passive, we use active looking endings. So in the aorist subjunctive passive, we're using the sixth principal part plus active looking endings, but always with a circumflex over where the theme vowel is. Okay? Now, the present subjunctive of Amy, and Amy only has a present subjunctive, always active, and it's just the endings O, ace, a, omen, a to osen. Again, always with a circumflex accent. Right. So the forms of the subjunctive are pretty easy, actually. And we're going to learn three easy uses for the subjunctive, too. These are all independent uses for the subjunctive. Now, just the name subjunctive comes from the fact that the subjunctive, normally we're going to see it in subordinate clauses, clauses that are subjoined to a main clause. But we're starting off in this lesson with some independent uses, okay, where the subjunctive is going to be the main verb in a sentence. So we're starting with the hortatory subjunctive. And the hortatory subjunctive appears only in the first person. It can be with a present or an aorist subjunctive. Okay, and the difference between the present and the aorist subjunctive we're going to see here is just a difference of aspect. You might have guessed this already because note that the subjunctives, the aorist subjunctives, don't have an augment, right? Because they just have simple aspect, not past time. So let's look at this example first. Balomen tus lithus. So that is a present active subjunctive from balo. And a hortatory subjunctive is it's when you're encouraging yourself to do something. So balomen tus lithus, let's be throwing the rocks. Here's a second aorist subjunctive active. So this is going to have simple aspect. Let's throw the rocks. So the difference between the present subjunctive and this aorist subjunctive is one of aspect. Present subjunctive, let's be throwing the rocks. Aorist subjunctive, let's throw the rocks. The negative for the hortatory subjunctive is nay. So here, blethomen, we have an aorist passive subjunctive in the first person plural. So let's not be hit by the rocks. Okay. Next use of the subjunctive. This one also appears in the first person, the deliberative subjunctive. We see this when we're deliberating about what to do. Okay, and these are always questions, deliberative questions, they're called. So here again, it is exactly the same sentence that we had in the previous slide, except now with a question mark. So we're going to take it as a deliberative subjunctive rather than as a hortatory subjunctive. Are we to be throwing the rocks? Should we be throwing the rocks? The negative for a deliberative subjunctive is again may. So here we have, are we not to throw the rocks? Okay. Present subjunctive here, right? Are we to be throwing the rocks? Aorist subjunctive here with may. Are we not to throw the rocks? Okay. So imperfective aspect, aoristic aspect. One more, right? This is sort of a classic example of the deliberative subjunctive. And again, we have a second aorist here. What are we to say? What should we say? Finally, the prohibitive subjunctive. Now, the prohibitive subjunctive is an aorist subjunctive with may, always in the second or third person. So the hortatory and deliberative subjunctives appear in the first person and can use either the present or aorist subjunctive, prohibitive subjunctive, second or third person, and always the aorist subjunctive. Okay, so let's look at one example here. Me balete tois lithois tus hippus. Do not hit the horses with the stones. Okay, another example. Me klepse ton thesauron hoklops. Let the thief not steal the treasure. So that's a third person singular, aorist, active subjunctive. And this is a second person plural, aorist, active subjunctive. In meaning, these prohibitive subjunctives are very like negative imperatives. Greek prefers for negative commands that have imperfective aspect to use may plus the imperative. But if you have aoristic, simple aspect, then you can use the prohibitive subjunctive with the aorist subjunctive. Okay? So we now know 3 independent uses of the subjunctive: the hortatory, the deliberative, and the prohibitive subjunctive. In subsequent lessons, we'll start to learn some uses of the subjunctive in subordinate clauses.